Alright, we're approaching the end of this theme, and this could be the most doomer pilled thing ever. Like, this is the saddest. Like, we almost lose at this point as environmentalists who don't want people drilling and mining and using fossil fuel shit, but apparently they found a loophole. The fossil fuel elites, those people who are aware that the planet's actually boiling at this point, but they are using renewable energy to power their technology. Yep, you've heard it here or some other place, folks. Alright. How can renewable energy technology support mining and drilling? Many people see renewable energy and fossil fuels as mortal enemies. One will succeed only at the expense of the other, the thinking goes. When it comes to on-site power, however, the situation reveals a more complex relationship. Renewable energy technologies can help fossil fuel developers power their mining and drilling operations. Mining and drilling operations of 10 set in remote areas of 10 sit okay, far from established electricity infrastructure, yet they often have significant power needs on the order of tens of megawatts and tens of gigawatt hours per site. Traditionally, diesel generators provided this power. However, they are expensive to fuel. Energy costs can represent 20 to 40% of mining operational cost. Further, regularly trucking in large quantities of fuel represents a risk if that supply is disrupted by bad weather, poor infrastructure, or other barriers. New options offered by wind and solar. Companies are slowly but steadily installing renewable energy at or near their sites to power at least some of their operations. By one estimate, the mining industry alone spent $209 million in 2013 on renewable energy investments. This makes sense since the recent cost of on-site wind and solar power can be half that of diesel generators. Examples of recent projects include, quote, 1. Rio Tinto supported a 9 megawatt wind farm in the Arctic near its mine. The DeGrussa sand fire mine in Australia added a 10.6 megawatt solar power plant. Hybrid microgrids balance fossil and renewable power benefits. Hybrid microgrids mark another common strategy for providing on-site power. They involve a combination of power sources, usually diesel or natural gas generators, combined with some renewable resources. Although many mining and drilling operations are active 24 hours a day, renewables provide power only during the day or afternoon and evening with wind. However, the fossil fuel can provide power at night. Well, with the moon or something, right? But that's very limited. Okay. Or whatever. Thus, the power sources are integrated into a single electricity grid to provide continuous power throughout the day. Sorry. It's like getting pretty late. Continuous power throughout the day. Recent projects include B2 Gold added 7 megawatts of solar panels to its Nyambia mine to complement existing heavy fuel oil generators. The Halal B oil platform offshore of Egypt was an early adopter of the microgrid strategy, employing a 36 kilowatt solar array mixed with generators and other power sources. Advanced storage extends the capabilities of hybrid microgrids. Further still, the most complex power projects take the hybrid microgrid approach and add next-generation battery storage. Fortunately, battery technology has advanced rapidly in recent years to keep up with the need to store increasingly large amounts of renewable energy. A variety of new battery technologies can now store larger amounts of power with lower cost and physical footprint. Therefore, adding these to a hybrid microgrid allows the miner or driller to access renewable power. The excess power can be used at night. The fossil fuel source remains part of the grid to provide power when batteries are depleted. Recent projects include Rio Tinto added an additional 5 megawatt of solar panels and advanced battery storage to an existing solar diesel microgrid to further decrease diesel use at a bauxite mine. Caterpillar began marketing hybrid microgrids that incorporate solar, diesel, and natural gas generators and advanced storage options. Target customers include remote mines and drill sites. Renewable adoptions will accelerate in coming years. Despite these advances, renewable energy currently provides only a small fraction of power at mines and wells. This will likely change, and quickly as prices for renewables and advanced storages continue their steep declines. By one estimate, investments in renewables just for mining will reach nearly $4 billion by 2022. That represents more than a tenfold increase from a decade before. Relatedly, the Sunshine for Mines analysis thinks mining companies alone can reach 8 gigawatt of renewable power by 2025. Can renewable energy technology support mining and drilling? A growing number of companies are answering yes. As new advances in on-site power develop, Pre-Scouter will keep you up to date on the evolving relationship between these seemingly bitter rivals. But they're still drilling for oil, right? And that's still a polluter of the earth, but to make it easier for their machines, not for the convenience of the health or anything. It's just makes this easier to do and produce and make more money and pollute the earth more, I assume. This isn't talking about like putting renewables into the public. This is just like corporate selfishness still. So I almost thought there was an angle here where there was going to be less pollution involved, but no. Alright, so that's messed up. I believe there really isn't any countering that unless we can totally just abolish their industry, which isn't happening. Like, you tell me. And so we see a common excuse for the collapse of our environment and pollution, which is our own species population. And this has been a common theme, especially in reproductive freedom history, which is very contentious, I think. This is because some people believe that we introduce so much filth, and we do, but not with our own bodies, but what we're given by capitalism to create landfills and whatever heats our water could produce pollution to a higher extent. Anyways, it's not a numbers game. It's just how our numbers are being used and and what they're using, you know. Anyways, climate change and population. We are sometimes asked, isn't population growth driving climate change? But that's the wrong question, and it can lead to dangerous answers. We frequently receive questions about population growth and its relationship to climate change. It's an old idea with a troubling history. In the context of solving the climate crisis, it's distracting at best, and at worst has the potential to do great harm to the climate and to people around the world. Here are the facts. Climate change is caused by heat-trapping emissions produced when we burn coal, oil, and gas and cut down forests. Data show that these emissions are most closely connected to carbon-intensive productions and consumption patterns, predominantly the carbon-intensive lifestyle of the relatively wealthy, both here in the United States and around the world. Fossil fuel companies, utilities, and their trade groups also bear significant responsibility. They have used their power, money, and deceptive tactics to lock in carbon-intensive infrastructure and constrain choices individuals can make about their energy supply. A misplaced focus on population growth as a key driver of the past, present, and future climate change conflates a rise in emissions with an increase in people, rather than the real sources of those emissions, an increase in cars, power plants, airplanes, industries, buildings, and other parts of our fossil fuel-dependent economy and lifestyle. Explicit in this faulty framing is the notion that all people contribute significantly to heat-trapping emissions. In fact, data show PDF that the richest 10% of the world population contributes 50% of annual global warming emissions. So even if you want to take a Malthusian and say, practice or ideology and say, like, the poor will just gobble everything up and devastation happens that way, that's still probably not going to contribute to global emissions. Although, as we gobble up the trees, our emissions make it harder to cool the earth, I believe, right? So, we sort of need the forests to cool the earth, so as we destroy that, anyways. A surprisingly unjust reality is that the impacts of climate change are falling disproportionately on the very populations that have contributed the least to the problem in the first place. This deeply flawed frame also takes the focus off urgently needed, effective, real climate solutions, including switching to low-carbon forms of energy, ramping up energy efficiency, and enhancing the health of our forests and soils that nurture life and help store carbon. The correlations between the rise in global heat-trapping emissions and global population has also been misrepresented and misused to advance discriminatory, racist, and xenophobic arguments for population control against immigration. This has been particularly harmful to black and brown people, marginalized communities, and people who live in poverty, and it is specifically an attack on reproductive rights and the rights of women. Population control has even been used by terrorists and white supremacists as motivation for violent acts, such as the 2019 terrorist attacks in El Paso, Texas, and Christchurch, New Zealand. UCSS's 50-year history includes a brief period during the 1990s when we did work on population and the environment. This includes work that we now understand to be deeply problematic and enmeshed in racist frames. Notably, the famous 1992 World Scientist Warning to Humanity includes references to pressures from unrestrained population growth and specific language targeted at developing countries. Developing nations must realize that environmental damage is one of the gravest threats they face, and that attempts to blunt it will be overwhelmed if their populations go unchecked. End quote. As we face into the future, we are building on the best of our legacy while also being transparent about and accountable for the aspect of the past work that are no longer accurate and in some cases harmful. Okay, so Iran produces the least. Oh, and Arab countries, they like produce the most children, right? At least that's what I've heard. Even though like all nations are declining, it's still like that's still like a pattern within the curve, Anyways, which countries are most responsible for climate change? Okay, cumulative dioxide emissions are the dominant driver of climate change. These began rising during the Industrial Revolution, especially after 1850, which means richer countries like the United States, which made an early transition to heavy fossil fuel-based economic system, have an outsized role in contributing to the climate impacts we see around the world today, both in terms of cumulative emissions and current per capita emissions. Richest countries rank high. Conversely, low and middle income countries have low cumulative historical emissions and per capita emissions. Even within countries, it is the relatively rich who are the most responsible for the majority of carbon emissions, and it's the rich who also have less children, so you see where this is going. How focusing on population causes harm. Efforts to link population growth and environmental degradation, and in recent years, population growth and climate change tend to wrongfully assume a simple and direct relationship between human numbers and environmental impacts such as deforestation, species loss, and greenhouse gas emissions. People living near areas of environmental degradation get blamed, even if the main drivers of those problems are consumption and production choices far away, such as when forests get cleared for timber to grow livestock or cash crops for export. In this misguided frame, efforts to reduce fertility rates and limit resource consumption become paramount solutions, even though they are often directed at people who already have very low, even subsistence level consumption patterns, and they fail to address the primary drivers. Theories of overpopulation have been offered as supposedly natural laws to explain resource scarcity and justify population control, a scarcity that is, in fact, often the product of system focused almost exclusively on profits and not societal needs, an economic and governance system that focused on broader social benefits instead of emphasizing corporate profits and extractive framework would go a long way towards addressing the root cause of scarcity. Arguments about overpopulation are used to promote coercive population control measures and human rights abuses, including forced sterilization and family size limitations that primarily affect black, brown, and indigenous communities and people who live in poverty. Furthermore, anti-immigration advocates in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere countries to use the threat of future consumption patterns and environmental degradation to argue for stricter limits to legal immigration for refugees flow from the global south, even as some Western countries provide per-child subsidies to expand their native-born populations. Real climate solutions. Promoting population control as a solution to climate change does not address the drivers of the problem. It reinforces inaccurate views that won't help make progress, and perpetuates often racist frames that harm people who hold the latest responsibility for climate change. Instead, we must tackle climate change in a just and equitable way by making shift and deep cuts in our heat-trapping emissions, investing in climate resilience, and working together with the nations of the world to fulfill the promise of the Paris Agreement in the context of sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty as called for in the agreement. The United States must clean up our power system and sharply reduce emissions from the transportation sector. We must increase efficiency and electrify energy use in the buildings and industrial sectors. Yeah, I agree with this completely, but I don't really like the idea of smart houses necessarily. I don't think our houses need to be hackable in that way. No, thank you. You can have a generator if your electricity shit goes out, obviously, but anyways, where was I? We must cut heat-trapping emissions from the food and agricultural sector and enhance the health and carbon storage capabilities of soils and forests. Absolute deep cuts in emissions must remain the primary means to limit global warming, but we'll also need technologies and practices that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And yeah, I don't really like the idea of putting stuff into the atmosphere to block the sun just to stall. That's just so messed up and doesn't do anything to really settle the industries that are doing this. Okay. And we must adopt measures that lower the overall climate footprint of our lifestyle and diet, especially for those segments of the population who have an outsized footprint. Moving towards more sustainable dietary patterns and food systems that can help reduce heat-trapping emissions while improving health and reducing pollution. Changes in how we develop our towns and cities, including choices about land use and investments in transit and walkability, can help cut emissions while contributing to healthier communities. Finally, we must eliminate the harmful influence of fossil fuel companies on our climate and clean energy policies and hold them accountable for their actions. I don't really think there's any way we're just going to change society, not in any foreseeable future, not in your kid's lifetime, most likely not in your kid's lifetime. They're still going to see chaos. We're still going to wonder why society isn't changed. But this is true. It has to be ripped out from the bottom and rebuilt. I feel like a lot of people are going to die once we actually decide to change society in a way that's I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it in this way where it's, I don't know, too negative, I guess. Anyways. Our solutions to climate change must be inclusive and just, and we must reject frames that implicitly or explicitly endorse racist or white supremacist ideology. The world depends on it. Alright. So, population control as an excuse to not take accountability. And so now we got global boiling happening. And again, they know this shit is happening. It's just, they don't care. Any day now. Okay, debriefed 28 July 2023. Global boiling era arrives. UK net zero under attack. Climate change and the human brain. Welcome to the Carbon Briefs debriefed and essential guide to the... Okay. This week, global boiling, record heat, July 2023 is set to be the world's hottest month in hundreds, if not thousands of years, according to a warning from scientists that was covered by much of the world's media, including The Independent. As millions around the world remain under heat advisories, officials have warned of dangers to life under hot temperatures, reported BBC News. Commenting on Earth's record July, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said the, quote, era of global boiling has arrived, end quote, according to Guardian. Wildfires. Wildfires have continued to blaze throughout the Mediterranean and northern parts of Africa this week. At least 34 people were killed in record fires in northern Algeria. African News reported. Sky News reported that thousands of tourists were forced to flee from wildfires on the Greek island of Rhodes. In the conversation, climate scientists explored how warming could have raised the risk of Rhodes fires. New normal. According to the new analysis reported on by Carbon Brief, the heat striking U.S., China, and Southern Europe this summer cannot be considered rare anymore in our current climate. The World Weather Attribution Service, the global network of scientists who investigate the influence of climate change on extreme weather events, found that the heat waves in the U.S. and Europe would have been, quote, virtually impossible, end quote, in the world without climate change. Atlantic turning point. Running amok. The New York Times was among outlets to cover news research looking at the possibility that an Atlantic current with a role in regulating the climate would collapse in the coming decades. The research discusses how climate change could be disrupting the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, a large system of ocean currents that carries warm water from the tropic northwards into the North Atlantic. The New York Times said the study suggests that warming could push the AMOC past a tipping point sometime this century. Contested. In its coverage of the study, New Scientist noted that, quote, other researchers have doubts about the accuracy of the projections, end quote. The Daily Telegraph reported that the UK Met Office has urged caution over the interpretations of the findings. On Twitter, Dr. Colleen Hughes, a climate scientist at the University of Gothenburg, accused the authors of exaggerating their findings. Net zero under attack. Policies questioned. There was extensive and contrasting coverage across the U.S. media about whether both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Labour Keir Starmer should change their approach to tackling climate change. The controversy started after Labour narrowly missed security by-election victory in the suburban London seat of Uxbridge and South Ruislip last Thursday, with political pundits blaming local opposition to London Mayor Sadiq Khan's policies for tackling air pollution. Misleading front page. Throughout the week, right-leaning newspapers published a series of prominent articles urging leaders to reconsider their commitment to tackling climate change. Among them, the Sunday Telegraph carried an interview on its front page with the Leveling Up Security Michael Gove under misleading headline. Quote, Michael Gove warns against net zero religious crusade, end quote. As Carbon Brief Dr. Simmons Evans highlighted on Twitter, Gove did not refer to net zero in this way in his actual interview. Political suicide. Meanwhile, The Observer reported on its front page that senior officials from business, the scientist community, and across the political divide warned that any delusion of climate policies would be deeply unpopular with voters and politically suicidal. A front-page story in the newspaper warned, quote, Tories warned over fiddling with green policies while roads burns, end quote. Earlier today, the Times reported that the UK's biggest environmental group, which collectively have millions of members, have threatened to start, quote, mass protests if Sunak waters down the country climate policies. Around the world, new IPCC chief, Prime Jim Ski, an eminent UK scientist, has been elected as the new chair of Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change. IPCC Political reported Carbon Brief interviewed Skye in 2016. Seagrass versus climate change. Wait, is this necessary for me to read right now? Sure. Okay. Citizen scuba divers in Germany are fighting to save carbon-sucking seagrass meadows in the Baltic Sea, reported Reuters. Florida hot tub. The Florida Key Oceans reached 38.43 C this week, the same temperature as a hot tub, reported The Guardian. The ocean temperatures are putting marine life at risk. El Nino hits Asia, Vietnam, and Thailand, two of the world's biggest rice producers, quote, have been preparing for the worst, as El Nino affects water availability for crop production, according to Fair Planet. GDP loss. The former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Sanusi Lamido, estimated that Nigeria could lose 2.5% of its GDP per year to climate change if global emissions are not addressed, according to the Nigerian newspaper Blueprint. Deep sea meaning. Crunch talks for the future of deep sea mining. Oh, what is wrong with me? Sorry, deep sea mining. That's just, I can see that being like a deep thing, deep sea meaning, whatever. Crunch talks about the future of deep sea mining are tabled to end today, but governments have not yet been able to agree on the agenda for the meeting, Climate Homes News reports. The number of endangered species of plants lichen in the U.S. are threatened by climate change, according to research covered by Daily Mirror. A new study in Nature Climate Change found that extreme weather events are putting around $80 billion of global trade at risk each year by shutting down ports or rendering them inoperable. Research published in Energy Research and Social Science found that while companies try to transition away from fossil fuels, oil and gas production has not declined, and remains profitable. Approximately 36% of the world's planet's forests are located in East Asia, according to research published in Scientific Data. Captured. 2023 likely to be the hottest year on record. I mean, yes, I would assume so. I mean, not to sound like a dick, but it's only getting hotter. Okay. Extreme heat waves are affecting countries across the globe, with 2023 now more likely than not to be the hottest year on record since the mid-1800s, according to New Carbon Brief Analysis. In his latest quarterly State of the Climate assessment, Carbon Brief's Dr. Zeke Housefather analyzes data from 5 research groups that documented global surface temperatures records to examine the pace of warming. Quote, after a relatively cooler start to the year due to an unusual triple-dip La Nina event, the world has witnessed an increasingly strong El Nino event that contributed to record-setting temperatures in June and July, he said. Spotlight. Climate change in the brain. As millions around the world remain under heat safety warnings, Carbon Brief examines how rising temperatures can affect the human brain. Scientists this week said that July will be the hottest month ever recorded on Earth, with the UN chief warning that the world is entering an era of global boiling. Rising extreme heat will have far-reaching consequences on the health of species across the globe, including humans. Earlier this year, a journal article warned that not enough is known about how climate change is affecting the most complex parts of the human body, the brain. Quote, we urgently need to understand the multi-layered consequences of global warming on the brain. Yeah. One major risk to the brain from climate change comes from the organ sensitivity to heat, and Dr. Osman Shabir, a postdoctoral research associate in neuroscience at the University of Sheffield, who is not involved in the journal article, he told Carbon Brief, quote, the brain is susceptible to temperature change, and therefore climate change will inevitably have long-term effects on the brain, end quote. When the brain is exposed to extreme heat, the blood-brain barrier can begin to break down, causing unwanted proteins and ions to build up. This, in turn, can cause inflammation and affect normal brain functioning. The long-term impacts of this exposure to heat are not fully understood. Shabir explained could affect the risk of change of neurological disease such as dementia, he added. Quote, increased heat exposure can alter key brain proteins associated with dementia. Increasing heat exposure also increases levels of key inflammatory molecules that can result in brain inflammation that is often seen in many neurological and neuropsychiatric conditions. These have the ability to cause long-term changes in the brain. And, quote, it is important to stress, however, that these are proposed theoretical mechanisms based on an animal study, and real-life validation studies need to confirm these associations. Whoa, okay then. Another way that climate change could be affecting our brain is by increasing the spread of infectious neurological diseases, he added. Quote, due to changes regional climates, incidence of certain infectious diseases can cause neurological disease will also increase, such as West Nile virus, which causes severe encephalitis, brain swelling, primarily amoebic meningoencephalitis, a rare fetal brain infection. Oh, great. Caused by Neoglaria fowleri amoeba, brain-eating amoeba, is also set to rise, end quote. Watch, read, listen. Climate cost. Today in Focus, a podcast by Guardian dedicated an episode to explaining the human cost of the wildfires in Greece, taking a closer look at the help and rescue effort offered by locals. Adaptation. As wildfires, floods, and increasing temperatures strike southern Europe, Deutsche Welle invited German researchers to discuss climate adaptation, focusing on solutions and the changes needed to get there. Drought. Reuters published an interactive investigation on how drought imperils Iraq's water buffalo and, quote, a child's way of life. Coming up, The 28 July, second part of the 28th annual session of the International Seabed Authority, Kingston, Jamaica. The 30th of July, the Climate Convention with Greta Thunberg. Okay. Alright. So we keep breaking records. And I feel like they just made up this term global boiling just to really be alertist. Like, obviously climate change, global warming, forests burning, floods, that's not like, so there's no way to get to the elites and the people at the top who have the oil power. Like, there's really no saying, hey, look at the facts, guys. So I mean, we know what we know. The facts are real. The earth is burning, and I feel like the transition to people who are studying global warming now saying global boiling, it's like false hope that someone at the top or someone in the middle can do something at all to get more done just based on the fear of the new word. Like, this really is important, and the word is meaningless, and what do you want to call it is meaningless. It's just, yeah. Alright, guys. Hopefully, there's hope. See ya.